When a school cares more about punishment than the truth, a student's future hangs by a thread. Today you'll hear a story that will challenge everything you think you know about justice. Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe and drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. Your support helps us bring more stories to life. The morning at Brook Ridge High had started like any other. Students rushed through the crowded hallways, slamming locker doors, trading hurried words before the bell. Danielle Carter, 18 years old and known throughout the school as the girl with the brightest future in science, walked calmly into her AP Physics class. She liked order. She liked being prepared. And that day, like every day, she slipped into her usual seat in the back corner, opened her spiral notebook, and began to jot down formulas while the sunlight caught the curls of her hair. Mr. Ellis, her physics teacher, stood at the board explaining the mechanics of projectile motion. He was mid-sentence, chalk scratching across the green surface, when the classroom door banged open so hard it echoed. Everyone froze. In the doorway stood Vice Principal Mark Hastings. Tall, sharp-faced, dressed in his usual gray suit, he carried an aura of cold authority that silenced the room instantly. He scanned the class once, then locked eyes on Danielle. "Miss Carter," he said, his voice like ice, "bring your belongings. You're needed in the office." Immediately, Danielle froze, her pen pressing hard against the paper until it left a deep dent. A hush spread through the class as 20 pairs of eyes turned toward her. Mr. Ellis frowned, stepping forward. "Is this urgent?" he asked carefully. "We're in the middle of—" "It's urgent," Hastings cut him off, his tone leaving no room for debate. "Now." Danielle's heart hammered in her chest. Confused whispers broke out behind her. "What happened? Is she in trouble? Cheating?" She forced herself to move, stuffing her books into her backpack, her hands shaking. As she walked down the aisle toward the door, she caught fragments of murmurs from her classmates. "I knew she wasn't perfect. Finally caught. Unbelievable." Each word stung sharper than the last. Hastings didn't speak as they moved through the hallway. His polished shoes clicked against the tiles in an even, sharp rhythm. Danielle tried to keep pace, her stomach twisting with dread. When they reached the administration wing, Hastings opened the door to the disciplinary review room, a cold, windowless space with a single table and 2 chairs. Sitting inside, still in his construction uniform, was her father, James Carter. His broad shoulders were tense, his work gloves shoved into his back pocket, his eyes filled with both worry and anger. "Dad," Danielle whispered. James's jaw clenched. "What's going on here?" Hastings closed the door with deliberate calm and set a thick manila folder on the table. He opened it slowly, like a judge preparing to deliver a sentence. "Miss Carter," he began, "you are being accused of academic dishonesty during last week's regional science aptitude test." Danielle blinked, the words sinking in too slowly. "Excuse me?" Hastings flipped through the file. "Your test responses match the official answer key word for word. Every equation, every diagram, every explanation, identical. The probability of this occurring by chance is non-existent." Danielle's chest tightened. "Because the answers are standard. Those are models. Any trained student would write them the same way." Hastings leaned back in his chair, his expression flat. "That's not how the review board sees it. They find your performance suspicious, improbable, evidence of misconduct." James's fist slammed onto the table, the sound reverberating through the small room. "You pulled me out of work for this? To accuse my daughter without even asking her teacher? Mr. Ellis is not responsible for matters of academic integrity," Hastings replied calmly. "This falls under my jurisdiction." Danielle's hands trembled on her lap. She had stayed up nights studying for that exam, poring over textbooks until her eyes blurred, solving problem after problem until she could do them in her sleep. And now, all of it, the hours, the dedication, the pride, was being erased by one cold accusation. "Do you have any actual proof?" she asked, fighting to keep her voice steady. "The proof," Hastings said slowly, "is that your answers match the key so perfectly it's impossible not to conclude prior access. Unless you'd like to confess now?" James shot up from his chair, his voice booming. "You want her to confess to something she didn't do?" "Over matching answers? This is ridiculous." Danielle's throat burned as she fought back tears. "I didn't cheat. I swear I didn't." But Hastings only shook his head with that look administrators wear when they've already decided. "This meeting is over," he said, gathering his papers. "You'll receive formal notification this afternoon." He left the room without another glance. The door clicked shut, leaving Danielle and her father in suffocating silence. James finally broke it, his voice low and fierce. "We're fighting this. Whatever it takes. We're not letting them destroy you." Danielle nodded weakly, but inside she felt the crushing weight of fear. Once an accusation like this took root, clearing her name would be like trying to swim against a hurricane. By lunchtime, the rumors had spread through every hallway of Brookridge High. Students huddled in groups, whispering, "Danielle Carter got caught cheating." "No way. She's like a genius." "Exactly. No one's that good without cutting corners." Danielle sat alone at a corner table in the cafeteria, her sandwich untouched in front of her. Her phone buzzed nonstop, messages filled with pity, thinly veiled glee, and outright mockery. Each notification tightened the knot in her stomach. Across the room, her best friend Maya Lopez pushed through the crowd, tray in hand, and sat across from her. Maya's dark eyes blazed with anger. "I don't believe any of this," she said firmly. "You've worked too hard for them to do this to you." Danielle tried to smile, but it barely reached her eyes. "It doesn't matter. Everyone already believes it." Maya leaned closer. "Then we're going to prove them wrong." Danielle wanted to believe her, but as she glanced around the cafeteria, watching the whispers, the stares, the smirks, she felt the ground shift beneath her life. And she knew this was only the beginning. The next day at Brookridge High, Danielle moved through the hallways like a ghost. Every whisper felt like it was about her. Every glance burned into her back. By the time she reached the cafeteria, she didn't even bother pretending to be okay. She sat at the farthest corner table, opened her lunch bag, and stared at the untouched sandwich her father had packed that morning. Her phone buzzed again and again. Notifications stacked up, classmates posting jokes, half-hearted sorry texts, and comments dripping with envy disguised as sympathy. Guess she wasn't as perfect as everyone thought. Knew it was too good to be true. The plastic chair across from her scraped against the floor. Maya Lopez dropped her tray onto the table and leaned forward. She was the only one brave enough to sit with her. "I don't buy a single word of this garbage," Maya said firmly, her eyes blazing. "Not for a second." Danielle forced a weak smile. "Thanks, but it doesn't matter what you believe." Everyone else already decided. Maya shook her head. "That's exactly why you can't just sit here and let them win." "Have you talked to Mr. Ellis? He knows you. He knows you wouldn't cheat." Danielle sighed. "I tried." Hastings already shut him down. Said all questions have to go through him. "That's shady. Really shady." Maya stabbed her fork into a piece of lettuce, furious. Before Danielle could reply, her phone vibrated again. This time it wasn't a classmate's taunt. It was a new message from an unknown number. "Meet me behind the gym after sixth period. I know something about the test." Danielle's stomach tightened. She turned the phone to show Maya. This could be a trap, Maya warned immediately. Or, she hesitated, lowering her voice, it could be exactly what you need. Danielle stared at the screen, her pulse quickening. I'm going. I don't have a choice. The rest of the day dragged like quicksand. Every class felt heavier than the last. When the final bell rang for sixth period, Danielle's nerves were so sharp they made her hands tremble. She slipped out a side door and made her way to the back of the gym. The air smelled of cut grass and asphalt. Near the maintenance shed stood a boy shifting nervously from foot to foot. Danielle recognized him, Aiden Patel, a junior who worked part-time as an office assistant. Aiden? Danielle called softly. He jumped, glancing around before motioning her closer. Keep your voice down. She approached cautiously. Why did you text me? Aiden swallowed hard. Because I saw something. And if anyone finds out I told you, I'm done for. Danielle's breath caught. What did you see? I was filing paperwork in the front office 2 days before the test, Aiden whispered. I overheard Vice Principal Hastings talking to Mr. Morris, the testing coordinator. They were saying some students were getting too much attention and needed a reality check. Then Hastings mentioned you. By name, Danielle froze. You're saying, Aiden nodded quickly. Later that same day, I saw him walk out of the secured testing room. He was carrying the folder with the answer key. That folder never leaves the room before exam day. Never. But he had it. Danielle felt her stomach drop like a stone. So he had the key before the test. And then my answers just happened to match perfectly. I can't prove what he did with it, Aiden said nervously. But if you ask me, he set you up. Someone wanted you taken down. Footsteps echoed in the distance. Aiden stiffened. I've said too much already. Just be careful, Danielle. They're playing dirty. Before she could respond, he jogged back toward the building. From behind the corner of the shed, Maya stepped out, her face pale. Oh my God, she whispered. They're framing you. This isn't just an accusation, it's a hit job. Danielle clenched her fists, her chest tight with rage. Then we'll get evidence. Real evidence, the kind they can't ignore. That night, at the Carter dinner table, Danielle told her father everything Aiden had said. James sat back in his chair, rubbing his temples, his face hard with fury. We need a lawyer, he said finally. Dad, lawyers are expensive, Danielle whispered. We can't. James stood, grabbing his phone from the counter. We can, and we will. I'm not watching them destroy your future over a lie. He scrolled through his contacts, his thumb pausing on a name. I'm calling Malcolm Bennett. Old friend of mine from the neighborhood, civil rights attorney. If anyone knows how to fight back, it's him. Danielle blinked. You think it's that serious? James looked her in the eye, his voice steady and fierce. Baby girl, when a system decides you're guilty before you even open your mouth, you don't play defense. You fight back with everything you've got. For the first time since the accusation, Danielle felt something stronger than fear flicker inside her. It wasn't relief, not yet, but it was hope. And that hope was the beginning of a battle they weren't going to walk away from. The following morning, Danielle woke up to the sound of her father's voice echoing through the kitchen. James Carter was on the phone, pacing back and forth, his voice sharp, steady, but burning with anger. Yeah, Malcolm, it's exactly like I said. They dragged her in, accused her, and slapped her with a suspension. No real evidence, just statistical improbability. Danielle sat up in bed, her heart pounding as she listened from the hallway. She already knew who her father was talking to, Malcolm Bennett, the attorney her dad had promised to call. By the time she came downstairs, a tall, salt-and-pepper-haired man with a weathered leather briefcase was standing in their kitchen, shaking her hand. His voice was low and gravelly, but steady. "Danielle," he said warmly, "your dad told me everything. I'll be straight with you. This is serious. But it's also winnable." Danielle, still in sweatpants and a hoodie, leaned against the counter, her arms crossed tight across her chest. "Winnable? How?" Malcolm pulled out the yellow legal pad, scribbling as he spoke. "First step, we file an official records request under the Student Rights and Privacy Act. That forces them to hand over every piece of evidence they're using against you. Test papers, proctor notes, internal emails, all of it." James nodded, jaw clenched. "Good. Make them show their hand second," Malcolm continued. "We demand access to school security footage. Anywhere testing materials were handled, anytime Hastings walked in or out of restricted rooms. If there's even a hint of tampering, we'll find it." Danielle felt her chest tighten, but this time it wasn't fear. It was the first stirrings of relief. "There are cameras in the admin wing," she said quickly. "Exactly." Malcolm gave a small nod. "If Hastings really pulled the answer key before the test, those cameras will prove it. And once we have that, we're not just fighting a suspension. We're fighting misconduct from the top down." Later that afternoon, Malcolm Bennett walked straight into Brookridge High's administrative office and handed the receptionist a formal letter. Vice Principal Hastings appeared within minutes, his expression tight as he flipped through the papers. "This is highly irregular," Hastings said coldly. "Not as irregular as suspending a student without evidence," Malcolm replied smoothly. "You'll provide the requested materials by the legal deadline. No exceptions." Hastings's jaw twitched, but he didn't argue. He simply turned on his heel and walked back into his office. But Danielle knew better than to take his silence as surrender. Hastings wasn't finished. Meanwhile, support for Danielle was quietly growing. Maya had taken it upon herself to act as Danielle's defender when she couldn't. She cornered Mr. Ellis in the hallway after class. "Sir, you know Danielle," she pressed. "You've seen how hard she works. Why aren't you saying anything?" Mr. Ellis rubbed the back of his neck, looking torn. "Maya, I wish I could. But the administration's put a gag order on faculty. If I say anything, I risk my job." Maya folded her arms, furious. "You're one of the best teachers here. If you don't stand up for your students, what's the point?" Before Ellis could respond, another teacher appeared from a nearby classroom. Miss Franklin, the journalism advisor. Her voice was low, urgent. "I overheard," she said quickly. "If you really want to help your friend, meet me after school in room 117. Maya blinked, startled. "Wait, what?" Miss Franklin gave her a knowing look. "Just trust me." That afternoon, Maya slipped into room 117. Miss Franklin was waiting with her laptop open. She handed Maya a flash drive. "This contains archived staff emails," Franklin whispered. "Someone flagged a thread where Hastings talked about making an example of a high-performing student this semester. He didn't say your friend's name, but the timing lines up perfectly." Maya's eyes widened. "This could be huge." "Be careful," Franklin warned, "and remember, digital footprints never disappear. Use this wisely." That night, Danielle sat on her bed, her laptop open in front of her. Next to her were copies of the school policies Malcolm had printed and the flash drive Maya had smuggled in. She scrolled through Hastings' emails, her stomach churning. Certain students need to understand no one is above the rules. Sometimes you have to send a message. Her dad walked in with 2 mugs of tea. "You okay, kiddo?" Danielle exhaled slowly, staring at the screen. "No, but I'm getting there." They sat together in silence for a while, the weight of the coming fight heavy in the air. But beneath the fear and exhaustion, something new was growing, a determination that this battle wasn't just about Danielle anymore. By Friday morning, tension hung thick over Brookridge High. Students whispered in the hallways, teachers avoided eye contact, and Danielle felt every stare burn into her as she cleared out her locker under security's watch. The humiliation was complete. But outside of school walls, the tide was beginning to turn. Maya had created an anonymous petition online, Justice for Danielle. Demand a fair investigation. By Sunday afternoon, it had over 2,000 signatures, from current students, alumni, community leaders, even a few teachers signing anonymously. On social media, hashtags like #JusticeForDanielle and #StopBiasInSchools began trending locally. But Hastings wasn't sitting idle. He sat in his office late that night, glaring at the petition on his computer screen. "Little troublemaker thinks she can stir up sympathy," he muttered. Picking up his office phone, he called Mr. Morris. "Tighten your proctor notes. Strengthen the documentation. We control the narrative going into the board meeting. And remind the faculty they stay neutral." As Hastings plotted, Danielle's father's phone buzzed. It was Dr. Evelyn Green, the only black member of the school board and a sociology professor at the local university. "Mr. Carter," she said warmly, "I've been following your daughter's case closely. I'd like to meet with you both before Monday's hearing." James hung up the call and turned to Danielle. "Looks like we just found our first ally on the inside." For the first time in days, Danielle let herself smile. Not because the fight was over, but because it had finally begun. The board meeting room at Brookridge High was overflowing by the time Danielle and her father arrived with attorney Malcolm Bennett. Parents, students, reporters, and teachers crowded into the seats, lining the walls and spilling into the hallway. The air buzzed with tension, whispers weaving through the crowd like static before a storm. Danielle sat at the front table between her father and Malcolm, her palms damp, her heart pounding so loudly she swore people could hear it. Across the room, Vice Principal Mark Hastings sat stiff in his suit, flanked by Mr. Morris, the testing coordinator, and 2 district lawyers. His expression was calm, but Danielle noticed how tight his jaw was, how his eyes never stayed still for long. At exactly 6 p.m., Board President Laura Whitaker banged her gavel. "This hearing is now in session." Tonight, we will review the disciplinary action taken against student Danielle Carter. All parties will present statements and evidence. A decision will be made before the end of this session. Danielle squeezed her father's hand under the table, forcing herself to breathe. This was it, the moment she had been waiting for and dreading all at once. Hastings was called to speak first. He rose smoothly, turning on his PowerPoint presentation. His voice carried the confidence of someone who had done this dozens of times before. "Members of the board," he began, "the integrity of Brookridge High's academic reputation is paramount. When we noticed irregularities in Miss Carter's regional science aptitude test, we had no choice but to act." The screen lit up with Danielle's test on one side and the official answer key on the other. The overlap was undeniable, word for word, diagram for diagram. A murmur rippled through the audience. "As you can see," Hastings continued, gesturing toward the slide, "the answers match to an extent that is statistically impossible without prior access to the key. Furthermore, our testing coordinator observed suspicious behavior during the exam. Mr. Morris stepped forward, monotone and flat. Miss Carter frequently looked around the room during the test. I logged it as unusual. No other student's responses were nearly this precise. Danielle bit the inside of her cheek, her nails digging into her palms. That was a lie. She remembered every second of that exam, eyes down, mind focused, completely absorbed in the problems. Malcolm slid a note across the table to her. Stay calm. Let them dig their own grave. After the presentation ended, Hastings returned to his seat with a smug little nod. Board President Whitaker turned to the Carters. Now we will hear from the student and her representatives. Danielle stood slowly, her knees weak but her voice steady. Good evening, she began, looking each board member in the eye. I've been at Brook Ridge High for 4 years. I've earned own grades in every science class, won competitions, and tutored other students after school. My teachers know my work ethic. My classmates know how hard I study. I didn't cheat. I earned that score. Her throat tightened, but she pressed on. The idea that my success is suspicious, that my best work must be dishonest, hurts more than I can explain. I've worked for years to get where I am, and I won't let that work be erased by assumptions. A few board members shifted uncomfortably. One nodded slightly. Danielle sat back down, her father giving her hand a quick squeeze. Now it was Malcolm's turn. He rose calmly, adjusting his tie. Ladies and gentlemen of the board, so far you've seen an answer key comparison and a subjective claim about body language. That is not evidence, but here's what the administration didn't tell you. He clicked to the first slide. Danielle's practice test scores from the past 6 months, all in the top percentile. Then he pulled up the email excerpts Maya and Miss Franklin had given them. Hastings' own words glowed on the projector screen. Certain students need to understand no one is above the rules. Sometimes you have to send a message. Gasps echoed through the room. Hastings shifted uncomfortably in his seat. But we're not done, Malcolm said firmly. He clicked again. The screen flickered, and a grainy security video began to play. There was Hastings, unmistakably him, walking into the secured testing materials room 2 days before the exam. The timestamp was clear. No one accompanied him. Seconds later, he exited with the folder containing the answer key tucked under his arm. The room went dead silent. Malcolm froze the frame. Hastings's face filled the screen, the folder clutched in his hand. I ask you, Malcolm said, his voice ringing out, why would the vice principal need unsupervised access to testing materials 2 days before the exam? And why was this fact omitted from his report? The silence was deafening. Board member Dr. Evelyn Green leaned forward, her eyes locked on Hastings. Vice Principal Hastings, would you care to explain this footage? Hastings' lips parted, but no words came out. His face had gone pale. Finally, he muttered, This is being misinterpreted. But Malcolm cut him off. No, this is being exposed. The audience erupted in whispers, some angry, some stunned. Hastings's composure cracked, his hands shook, his face flushed red. Board President Whitaker banged her gavel. We will recess for 15 minutes to deliberate. As the board members filed out, the audience buzzed louder. Maya, sitting in the front row, leaned over the rail and grabbed Danielle's hand. You did it, she whispered. Danielle shook her head, tears burning her eyes. Not yet. But maybe soon. When the board returned, their faces were grave but resolute. President Whitaker cleared her throat. After reviewing the new evidence, the board has reached a decision. The suspension of Danielle Carter is hereby rescinded. All disciplinary records relating to this incident will be expunged immediately. The room erupted in gasps, then applause. James Carter let out a deep breath, pulling Danielle into a fierce embrace. Maya clapped so loudly she startled the people next to her, but Whitaker wasn't finished. Furthermore, due to serious procedural violations, Vice Principal Mark Hastings is placed on administrative leave pending further investigation. The applause grew louder. Hastings shot to his feet, face red with fury. "This is a mistake. You're letting one-sided evidence cloud your judgment." Dr. Green's voice cut through the noise. "What's clouded, Mr. Hastings, is your ability to recognize your own bias. This board has a duty to protect every student, including those you chose to target." Security stepped forward as Hastings sputtered, then escorted him out of the room. The crowd rose to its feet, cheers mixing with clapping. Danielle felt her knees buckle with relief as she hugged her father again, tears finally streaming down her face. For the first time since this nightmare began, she believed it might truly be over. But deep down, she also knew this was bigger than just her. This was about every student who had ever been silenced by someone in power. And she wasn't done fighting yet. The morning after the board hearing, Brookridge High felt like a different place. When Danielle Carter walked through the front doors, the stares she once dreaded carried a new weight. No longer whispers of suspicion or mockery. They were looks of respect, even admiration. A few students clapped quietly as she passed. Others offered nods, handshakes, or whispered, "Glad you're back." At her locker, Maya Lopez leaned against the metal door with a grin that stretched from ear to ear. "Girl, you're a legend now. You took down Hastings and survived." Danielle chuckled, shaking her head. "Don't exaggerate. I still have a calculus assignment due." "Yeah," Maya teased, "but now you're doing it as the girl who defied the vice principal and won." The day moved faster than Danielle expected. Teachers who once avoided eye contact now greeted her with warmth. Mr. Ellis stopped her in the hallway, his voice heavy with regret. "I should have spoken up sooner," he admitted quietly. "I knew you wouldn't cheat. You've always been one of the most honest students I've ever taught." Danielle met his eyes. "I get it. But next time, be louder. Not just for me. For anyone in the cafeteria, a group of students approached her with a phone. They had created a meme. Danielle photoshopped as Katniss Everdeen, bow in hand, with the caption, "The girl who defied the principal." The whole table laughed, and for the first time in weeks, Danielle laughed with them. That afternoon, her inbox filled with messages. Some were from classmates she barely knew. Others came from alumni, community leaders, even strangers from nearby schools. One message stood out. "Last year, I almost got expelled for something I didn't do. Seeing you fight back gave me hope. Thank you." Danielle read it 3 times before saving it in a special folder. Maybe her battle had been about more than just her future. Maybe it had cracked open something bigger. 2 weeks later, Principal Laura Chen, who had stepped in after Hastings' suspension, called Danielle into her office. Unlike the cold, windowless review room, Chen's office was filled with sunlight and bookshelves. "Danielle," Chen began warmly, "I wanted to personally apologize for what you went through. This school failed you, but we're determined to do better." Danielle nodded cautiously, unsure what to say. "The board has recommended a new initiative," Chen continued. "We're creating the Student Advocacy Council to make sure student voices are heard in disciplinary matters. We'd like you to be a founding member." Danielle blinked in surprise. "You want me to help shape school policy?" "Exactly," Chen said with a small smile. "We want real student voices at the table, not token ones, yours especially." Danielle's lips curved into a slow, genuine smile. "I'd be honored." Back at home, life began to feel almost normal again. Except now, instead of fear, Danielle felt purpose. She poured herself into preparing for the statewide science competition. The night before, she sat at the kitchen table surrounded by notes and formulas. Her father sipped his coffee, watching her with quiet pride. "You ready for tomorrow?" he asked. "More ready than ever," Danielle replied. James smiled, setting his mug down. "No matter what happens, remember this. You already won something bigger than any trophy." Danielle chuckled. "I wouldn't mind winning both." They laughed together, the heaviness of the past month finally lifting. The next morning, the crisp autumn air greeted her as she walked into the auditorium. Her father, Maya, and even Malcolm Bennett sat in the front row, waving supportively. When her name was called, the applause was louder than she expected. Even students from rival schools seemed to know her story. Her presentation focused on algorithmic bias in education, weaving in real-life examples of how testing systems and human judgment could unfairly disadvantage minority students. Her voice was steady, her reasoning sharp, her examples compelling without bitterness. When she finished, the judges sat in stunned silence before rising to their feet in a standing ovation. Later that night, Danielle's name was announced as a state champion. She walked to the podium, medal around her neck, her voice strong as she addressed the audience. "I hope my journey reminds us that excellence shouldn't have a color or a stereotype. Every student deserves to be judged by their work, not by assumptions about who they are." The crowd erupted into applause. Back home, Danielle scrolled through countless messages of congratulations. Among them was an email from Dr. Evelyn Green. "Danielle, we'd love to have you as a student speaker at next month's Educational Equity Conference. Your story is exactly the kind of perspective we need." Danielle sat back in her chair, her heart full but steady. They had tried to tear her down, but she had turned her worst moment into a platform for change. As she switched off her lamp that night, she whispered to herself, "This isn't just my victory. It's for every student who's ever been doubted or told they didn't belong." And tomorrow, the fight for fairness continues, and with that, Danielle Carter closed her eyes, no longer just a student, but a symbol of resilience, justice, and hope. Danielle's story reminds us, one accusation can shatter a future, but truth and courage can change everything. If this story moved you, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. Your support helps us bring more powerful stories of justice to life.